Welcome to a special bonus episode of The Whole View with our original founding co-host, Sarah Ballantyne. Welcome to The Whole
Woo,
View.
woo. I'm so happy to be back. It's like, when you're like go off to college and college is like completely overwhelming, but you're like doing it, you like feel like you're finally an adult, but then you go back home and like you suddenly relax and you're like, aha, okay. That's the feeling I'm having right now. It's the
Oh,
feeling of like, okay, first summer home after a couple semesters away at college.
well, we are happy that you feel at home here and we're happy to have you back. Listeners, if this is somehow your first time, I'm Stacy Toth of Real Everything, and we talk each week about how to find happiness and health inside and out through self-love, body positivity, and discovering new ways to be our best selves. And this episode is a bonus episode because Sarah and I did the show for 500 episodes together. And every single week, I really genuinely don't know how we pulled that off with all the kids that we had between us. And I
Yeah.
had a career and like all that kind of stuff. We somehow made magic happen for 500 episodes. And then Sarah has gone off to what she's referring to as college. So tell us what you've been up to. It has been way too long.
Agree.
What is going on?
So I'm going to hold up my prop because I brought it with me. I made a new book, baby. I had made a whole new everything, a new website, a new social media presence. I'm on social media platforms I wasn't on before. I made a whole new dietary philosophy. So I made a bunch of things all under the umbrella term Nutrivore, which I refer to as the simple goal of getting all of the nutrients our bodies need from the foods we eat. That's the beginning, middle, and end of what being a Nutrivore is. And the book and the website and my social media content is about creating the broad nutritional sciences education for the average person to help inform their day to day choices so that they can increase their nutrient intake within their preferred diet or anti diet. So, Nutrivore is not a diet. There's no foods to avoid, or there's no foods you have to eat. It is quite simply understanding what nutrients do in the body, what foods contain what nutrients, and how to combine different foods to get the full range of nutrients that we need. So I create all of those resources outside of any specific dietary structure. I still go for a 4 mile hike every morning. I believe that's the thing that's holding me together. Yes.
How is your puppy that's no longer puppy now?
Yeah. She literally just turned 4 years old, which is really crazy to think of. She's grown into just a lovely dog. She's super well behaved, but also like super communicative. I think we have a really lovely like mutual respect, and I thank the YouTuber Zach George for training me how to train a puppy during the beginning of the pandemic because that's everything was shut down, and so I just watched Zach George YouTube videos for hours every day to figure out what to do with my little puppy. And sure enough, all of the promises that he made have come true. And she is still like a complete clown because Portuguese water dogs are. That's just their personalities. Still too smart for her own good, but also just she wants to be a lap dog, all 55 pounds of her. She's just like cuddly. She wants to be under your feet all the time. She's in the middle of everything. If you're trying to have a conversation, she's there with a squeaker toy trying to monopolize the conversation. So she is just the most delightful. She's the best thing I've ever done for my health. Like right there, she is the best thing I have ever done for both my physical and mental health.
I will ask Lauren, who now does the show notes because our teams are no longer what they used to be. And Lauren has been an awesome partner for the podcast to put in the show notes the show that we did about you getting a dog and talking about how great dogs are for health. Because I talk a lot about the connection between physical and mental health since you've
Mhm.
left. And it has been eye opening for me as you went on in your journey. My path very much went down helping a traumatized foster child
Yeah.
acclimate to our home and like learning outside my own privilege bubble, learning how much ACE traumas and traumas in general have on our health and wellness. And so it's interesting how like our paths can be not so much in parallel anymore, but there are so many people who are still understanding and connected to both of these things that we're on this path and journey of wellness on, right? Like they're not divergent from each other in terms of like
Yeah.
there's still overlap, there's still those things. And our friendship is what it is forever and always. There was so much question in the beginning about what's really going on with you and Sarah. And I was like, nothing. We're just both going in directions that our careers taking us after 500 episodes
Yeah.
together. So I think now looking back on it, people who listened to the show originally can probably see and understand where we both were at that point of like, I'm really feeling pulled in this direction and I'm really
Yeah.
feeling pulled in this direction and seeing the growth that we could both experience from exploring both.
And as much as I really still miss doing the show every week, I really still miss chatting with you and the connection with the listeners. I would not be able to be showing off all of my Nutrivore things if I hadn't made sure to reallocate that time to this thing that I cared so deeply about building, that I see having such a huge potential to really change the landscape of public health in a way that diets, right? Like big D diets don't have the capacity to, because it's not a diet, because it doesn't involve restriction, because it gets us out of that I ate something off plan, so now I feel guilty, so now I have disinhibited eating patterns, right? It gets us out of that that roller coaster, and it's just about developing lifelong eating patterns, which I think is something we talked about a lot in maybe the last 100 episodes that I did with you. But I get to now create these resources for the person who thinks that healthy eating is out of reach for them, because diet culture has made the barrier to entry seem so high. And my goal with Nutrivore is to take that bar and like dig a trench and bury the bar so that we really can look at the benefits of one serving of fruits or vegetables per day. Like, and how, like, the science says that's huge. If that's where you're starting from and we are adding one serving, maybe it's even most days and not every day, that has huge benefits to long term health. And we can super celebrate that decision. We can make it whatever is available wherever you get to shop for your groceries. Maybe you don't live close to a grocery store. Maybe it's a can of green beans from the gas station. We get to celebrate how beneficial that choice is and completely dissociate from, I think, this world that we were both super steeped in for a long time, that makes you feel like if you're not perfect, of however that particular diet community defines perfect, then it doesn't count. Then you don't, whatever you're going through, it's your fault, that you don't deserve something. Like, it gets us completely out of that really toxic mindset. So for me, Nutrivore is, I think the best way to frame it is, I think restrictive diets have gone, that pendulum swing has gone as far into restriction as it can go. People are over it. People are sick. There's nothing left to restrict. People are eating one food now. Like, it has gone as far as it can go. And with the growth of the body positivity movement, intuitive eating, anti diet, I see that pendulum swinging the other way. And Nutrivore is here to stop the pendulum from swinging, right? To catch it and say, yes, let's embrace body positivity, health at any size, non restrictive eating patterns, a permissive dietary structure rather than the restrictive one that is still flexible and adaptable to your specific needs, and gets us off of that roller coaster of shame and guilt, while still embracing the benefits of higher diet quality, like while still teaching what we don't know intuitively anymore. Like, so many people don't know what a balanced diet looks like because the mixed messages from diet culture have taught us so many different things that are not actually in line with where the science is at. So for me, Nutrivore is about making diet culture not a thing, making it no longer have influence over our lives, which is, just a small goal.
Just small. Yeah. I think it's interesting because for me, when I hear the terms even balanced diet, it's a trigger word for me. I
Yeah.
immediately I get like like on the inside, because I think about now that I am much more engaged in the community of people who are educating on the opposite side of the aisle that I lived on for so long,
Mhm.
and I see content like diet culture says only eat lean meats, but then add MCT oil to your coffee. And they'll do these like things where it's two totally opposite things. And yet that is what diet culture has told
Yeah.
people. And no wonder people are confused. And how can you find balance when there's so much noise and chaos in the world of telling you what to eat? And so for me, I found peace in just being like, I'm going to shut that world
Mhm.
down. Like that world doesn't exist for me. And then I do think, as you mentioned, like you end up going in this opposite way of the pendulum. And my personal experience is after having disordered eating for so long on the opposite side, then my body was like, oh, we can have the things. Now we're going to have all the things and we're going to refeed ourselves after literally being starved our whole life and thinking that I'm never going to get X, Y, or Z again. And eventually, the goal, whether it be intuitive eating or whatever someone is calling something, where they're just existing with food as nourishment and fuel for their bodies, that goal is to live in peace with that, right? To not
Yeah.
hear the noise and all of those things. And I think that is such a complex thing to describe to someone because you have to be willing to see the problem of diet culture. Then you have to be willing to completely let go of it all and be willing to like fully fall into, as you and I used to joke, a pizza buffet after
That's right.
3:30, right? Like you have to be willing to do whatever and then come to whatever balance that is for yourself.
Mhm.
And it could take a really long time of not denying yourself, depending on how strict and how long someone's journey on that pendulum could have been.
Yeah, I think the best way that I can describe what I'm trying to build with Nutrivore is a set of not even principles, like just a knowledge base. Like you graduate from high school and algebra and you know your multiplication tables and you have some basic grammar skills, right? Just creating that basic knowledge base that can help us improve diet quality within our budget, within what we have access to, within our time constraints and energy constraints, within our food preferences. And we can improve diet quality. There's no perfect, right? There's where we're starting from and what's a level better diet quality than that. And we can do that in a way that feels natural, that doesn't feel like we're white knuckling every meal, that doesn't feel like we're depriving ourselves, that is just, oh, I understand the value of that can of green beans at the gas station. That's the vegetable I have access to. That's what I'm going to add to my regular rotation. And I'm going to prepare it in a way that I enjoy so that I don't feel like I'm gagging every time I try to eat a vegetable. And I'm going to appreciate the long term health benefits that's going to give me. So I get to improve diet quality without it being a diet, without it having a weight loss goal or a body whatever, like a heal my leaky gut goal. It's just about supporting my long-term health. Yes, that can improve how I feel today, but it's much more about making higher diet quality as normal and non-restrictive as possible so that we can reduce the risk of health problems down the road without feeling like we're sacrificing our joy from food today to get there.
And it's interesting to be on the other side as a foster parent. I feel like is the only way that I would have been able to truly understand what it is that you're referencing in terms of food desert and lack of knowledge or education, right? Because I have a child who learned that food was bad and learned that food
Mm,
was something that was doing things to their body that they were criticized for or different kinds of things. And never that food was fuel, never that food was nourishment. And grew up eating cereal and ramen and coming into my home and realizing that's one of the only comforts that they have of consistency in their life is the food that they've eaten. They have a completely different wardrobe. They have a completely different bed. They have a completely different group of people that they now live in. They have a completely different set of rules in their home. But the one thing that remains constant is those Lay's potato chips that are plain are my favorite. Can you get them from
Yeah.
the store? And I remember specifically a couple of months in to them being here, I shared on social about having Jif peanut butter. There was a recall, and I was like, "Hey, I just want to like let everybody know if you have this peanut butter, like we have right here, return it because it's not good." I forget even what the problem was, and there were multiple people who trolled me, like, "Why do you even have that peanut butter?" And I got so mama bear defensive about it and was like, because that's the peanut butter that my child will eat. That's the peanut butter that gives my child a sense of comfort and stability and safety in the world. And like, of all the things that there are to worry about in this world, you judging me about what peanut butter is in my house is like the last thing that needs to be on someone's list. So it's interesting to hear you say something like green beans on a gas station shelf as being something that could improve someone's health because there are certainly points in our journey and years ago on this show
Yeah.
where we would have had a very different perspective on that and
Mhm.
would have been judgmental, would have been negative, would have been harsh about all those things. And I noticed that in the past couple of months, especially, there has been an awakening in your social media. And I don't want to say that like your social media is different because I do see a transition over the years, but certainly it's like people finally realized that you were saying something different or had a mindset shift. And so I wonder if you could share specifically, I pulled one of your Instagram posts to speak to that language and that change because I think it might help listeners understand a little bit of that journey for you. Like my
Yeah.
journey is mine in terms of the foster kid and understanding, but your journey has been different for you and the reasons why I think are important.
Okay. I would love to. I get asked here almost every week about how and why my content is so very different than it was pre pandemic. Moving forward requires taking a step back and letting go of value judgments about food that lack scientific support. It's crucial to emphasize that this isn't about laying blame or feeling guilt, but rather about making room in our minds for a wealth of new, invaluable information focused on the positives that we can gain from a nutrient focused approach like Nutrivore, where no food is off the table. Nourishment, not judgment. It's important to stay up to date on scientific evidence, and recent studies have definitely changed the landscape of human knowledge of nutrition. Nutritional sciences is a very young field of research, and thanks to advances in methodology and technology, new studies are adding to our understanding all the time. I gave a webinar that was long in the making called The Truth About Food Toxins. I spoke in detail about 12 common food toxins and share how my approach has changed. I was able to do that thanks to new evidence and scientific studies that challenged the status quo. Additionally, some of the myths I busted in this webinar, I was able to do so thanks to my shift to a more rigorous metric and objective view of the science. It is the responsibility of all scientists to adjust our stance when new studies demand it.
I want to applaud you for that. First of all, transparency and change and being vulnerable like that is difficult. And I know that there are people whose belief is if you are not steadfast in your stance, then you are wrong, right? Like, well, then you
Hmm.
were wrong before versus I did the best that I could with the knowledge that I had at the time. We have hypotheses, we try them out, we move forward, and then we see if they worked or not. And a lot of what we talked about was often N equals one type stuff, right? Do the things that work for you because the science wasn't fully supporting some of the things we could see some science and we could talk about it's really bio independent and some of these things. And one of the areas that I wish that we had better understood at that time was the role of mental health in our brain and our nervous
Mhm.
system going into a lot of these things, because we talked about reducing stress, but not in the same kind of way that the information and the science now is really in depth on having a role in chronic illness that we didn't give credit to before. But I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to what some of that science is that you specifically found to be helpful in moving you forward.
So I think to take a step backwards in terms of the journey for me for even like changing how I read the science. When I first came into the paleo community in 2011, I was a zealot because paleo really rapidly
I
resolved
think
some
you
health
even said that.
issues.
I
Yeah.
remember specifically you being like, "I was the person that everywhere you went and all they could talk about."
Well, hey, did you know that bagel you're eating is going to kill you? But yes, no, I was a zealot. The reason why I started my original website was because I needed an outlet for that enthusiasm. And it's because I had symptoms that I had been dealing with for 12 years that resolved very quickly, that I now recognize as being purely driven by undiagnosed gluten intolerance. But I didn't know that until I changed my diet, and I credited everything that I was cutting out for those changes, which I think is how most of us who were in the paleo community felt about it at that time. And I also learned this way of thinking about foods from scientists like Professor Lauren Cordain, who would talk about the lectins in wheat or grains and legumes and how those can increase inflammation or intestinal permeability. And so I learned this way of thinking about foods that if you can identify a compound or a collection of compounds that have this negative effect to one biological system, well, then that food's terrible. We should not eat that food. And the beginning of my like complete change of perspective, my awakening, if we can call it that, was actually the research I did in the gut microbiome that started in what, 2015, I think is when I started working on that book.
I think your
Um,
first like green post wasn't until like 17 or 18. But I remember it
yes.
being, ooh, I'm gonna put this out there thing.
Yes, and I started very intentionally, like, talking about oats and corn and lentils and chickpeas in was either late 2019 or very early 2020 was when I was like, "Okay, here's all this body of scientific evidence. I think there's things that we might be wrong about on paleo. I'm gonna start presenting this science." So it started with looking through the lens of the gut microbiome. Our gut bacteria influence every aspect of our health, and I was look at these studies that show, oh, these foods that contain lectins that I have not been eating for many years now also happen to contain incredibly beneficial fiber types. They're rich in vitamins and minerals. They have all these polyphenols that our gut bacteria love. And lo and behold, when you eat these foods, they improve the composition of the gut microbiome. And so I started reevaluating foods through the lens of the gut microbiome and trying to understand maybe some of the foods that I'm cutting out, maybe I would be better off if I reintroduced them. And I like to walk the walk. I started reintroducing them one by one, very cautiously. Initially, I had a lot of fear, and that made the stress response of adding these foods back in make it hard to interpret whether or not they were working for me. As I got more comfortable with, I'm pretty sure I feel better with lentils in my diet. I'm pretty sure I feel better eating corn. As I reintroduced those foods and calmed that phobia, right? It was a stress response. I had fear of those foods from being steeped in the paleo community, the AIP community for so long and being steeped in that way of thinking about foods. But as I was introducing them into my own diet and always, like, after researching them excessively because that's the way I live life, I really started to go, I think there's some things that we have wrong, and that made me leaving the paleo community feel more important. Also, beginning of pandemic was a time where I'm trying to follow the science and expand my diet, and I'm seeing a lot of my ex-colleagues actually lean into anti-science conspiracy theories. That doesn't jibe with who I am, and Nutrivore was like the natural place for me to go. But Nutrivore itself as a concept, I think, really then evolved like between when I first started working on it in early 2020 to launching the website 14, 15 months ago and writing the book over that same period of time. Nutrivore itself then evolved because then I started looking at, okay, not just through the lens of the gut microbiome, let's look at how lentils impact cardiovascular disease risk, type 2 diabetes risk, risk of Alzheimer's disease. And what I very quickly discovered is I'm thinking about foods. I've learned this way of thinking about foods, and it's a logical fallacy. It's incorrect. Just because there's one compound in a food that maybe is not beneficial or maybe it's harmful even in one particular circumstance, that doesn't mean that the whole food with thousands, millions of different compounds in it, so many different molecules, that doesn't mean the whole food has that impact. The whole food has nutrients that can counteract the impact of lectins, for example. And so if I look at the impact of the whole food as part of a regular eating pattern and look at the impact of that on health, well, the science shows a very different story. The science shows legumes do all the good things that we want health-wise. And then I even upped, I think, the level of scientific rigor even more. I mostly quote meta-analyses and systematic reviews. I very rarely quote individual studies. I only do when they agree with the meta-analyses and the science. Like that study itself was like fascinating because of they did a thing where they gave women like what
Dug into it deeper.
20% of their calories from almonds every day and they had less wrinkles after a few months. Like that's just cool. We all want to know that kind of science, right?
But
But
let's not all become almond moms. Let's just
correct. This is different. This is different than being, yes, no, that is super not, we super do not want to be an almond mom here. But I think why I started leaning into systematic reviews, like I was building a new brand at the same time. And I felt like this isn't me entering a community that already exists, that already has a fan base, that already has visibility online. This is me building a thing that I want to grow even bigger, that I want everyone in the world to eventually know about. I want the word Nutrivore to be added to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Like this is my ultimate goal. And so it can't rely on me as a influencer or personality. It has to be ironclad scientific evidence. And as I'm realizing that my scientific approach was flawed, that this way of thinking that I learned from people I super respected with all the fancy acronyms at the end of their names too, as I'm realizing that's not the right way to evaluate the merits of food, I'm also building this thing that I want to stand up to scientific scrutiny. And so, in order to do that, I need to use the highest form of scientific evidence to inform every single thing I say, every little detail. So, I now rely very heavily on systematic reviews. And what they do is they pool together data from many different studies. So, they have higher statistical power to be able to evaluate whether or not something is good or bad for us overall, how it impacts different health outcomes. And they're typically incorporated it as part of a meta-analysis and systematic review typically go hand in hand. So that also includes reviewing the literature that explains mechanisms, that explains why legumes reduce cardiovascular disease risk. And so I then, in writing the book and building the website, I was like, well, I'm going back to the drawing board on everything. I there's nothing I have talked about in the past that I am not going to go back to the science. And so going back to the science with this different perspective, like a lot of it was me relearning where the science is at because I'm looking at it more objectively, more rigorously. I'm more back to my medical researcher roots, I think. But then also I'm updating. And so, for example, the science on vegetable oils has really changed in the last 5 years. Vegetable oils have this like we've got the mechanisms of why the linoleic acid should be inflammatory. We know the molecules, the paracrine and autocrine signaling molecules that linoleic acid gets turned into in the cell membrane that are responsible for pro-inflammatory signal. Like we know, like we've got this whole biochemical pathway mapped out. We know omega-3 to omega-6 ratio should matter for inflammation. But the studies done in humans over the last few years show actually vegetable oils reduce cardiovascular disease risk and are either neutral for inflammation or slightly anti-inflammatory. And we don't know why, but there's so much data now just from the last few years saying actually no, vegetable oils, totally healthy oils to eat. There's nothing wrong with them. In fact, they're extremely beneficial, and like canola oil and olive oil are like equal in their health benefits, and they work slightly differently. So we are better off health-wise if we use them both and like mix it up. That was so mind-blowing to me. And what it means is that there's something regulating the molecules that are being formed out of omega-3 and omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids in the cell membrane that is not just substrate availability, which is what we thought it was. And we don't know what it is, which is so cool. So I think what I'm saying I'm speaking pure nerd right now. I realize I've stopped speaking English. It's just nerd now. But going back to the science with this new perspective and with a really as open a mind as I could. My mind is continuously blown. Like every time I'm like, oh, I found another corner. I found another corner of food judgment that I haven't challenged that I need to, I found another food. Wait, I wasn't eating peanuts. Okay, we're gonna do the research on peanuts and I'm gonna talk myself into eating peanuts. And oh, look, they're delicious. Yay. Every time I've been able to do this, it's improved my quality of life because it's another way that I'm increasing dietary diversity, which is really important. It's another collection of foods that I'm able to eat. It's another way that I can think positively about a food instead of negatively. It's another way that I can move beyond restrictive mindsets. And then it's like just cool science because I get to learn with my previous knowledge base, I get to learn fresh. Like, what are the benefits of these foods and how does that work? So it's this journey again, it really started back in 2015 ish when I started a gut microbiome book that never, but it's really accelerated with the development of Nutrivore and wanting Nutrivore to be as accessible to people as possible and as flexible as possible. So yeah, so I have very different views on all of the foods I didn't eat before.
I love also that you, first of all, spoke so openly about so many things, but in particular, how incredibly hard it was for both of us to be in the midst of the pandemic and to see so many, not just colleagues, but friends
Yeah.
saying and doing things that felt like it put public health in danger and that
Yes.
it felt like we were responsible for having a voice to the wellness community still being rational, logical people. And I think that has really, I don't know about you, but for me, it has really informed my perspective as I move forward in the health and wellness space to ensure that I continue to break down the barriers of health and wellness being this healthisms enabled concept that held up standards of supremacy in terms of
Mhm.
thinness and whiteness and all of these kinds of things that I did not understand when we were
Yeah.
originally talking about these things. And seeing the behavior of people and seeing what they were saying and where it was coming from during that time, it was like an explosion in my brain of like, oh my gosh, that's what I've been doing. Like, I did not mean to be a part of that. And I think there are a lot of people, listeners, who are still here, readers of our websites, who also had that awakening, right? Who were like, oh, I did not I am not okay with that thing that person
Yeah.
is doing anymore. And so I really appreciate that you're calling that out because I think that it was eye-opening for a lot of people who were thinking of health and wellness in any sort of aspect in terms of like identifying that, putting a name to it. And you've also posted more recently about healthism and, as
Mhm.
you spoke to, the confirmation bias in terms of how you were perceiving scientific articles or looking for the answers that you believe to be true, those kinds of things. How do you think, when you consider Nutrivore and the work that you're doing, but also the overall health and wellness space, and we're working toward making things more inclusive, both of us, right? We're both, there are a lot of people in the community, but we can only speak for ourselves here. There are a lot of people who are trying really hard to help people who think that health isn't possible for them. That's not like health isn't even on their radar because they have 3 jobs and they
Mhm.
get 4 hours of sleep and they can't afford organic foods. So they think they can't be healthy. Like, where do we think that the possibility of inclusion is somehow going to converge? You know what I mean? Like, what does that look like to you?
That's such a good question. I think there's so many different barriers we need to break down to make higher diet quality truly inclusive. So, one problem that we have right now in the, uh, for lack of a better term, wellness community at large is that the social media algorithms reward fear. Fear engages. And that is what a lot of influencers' businesses are based on, right? So their livelihoods are based on making you afraid of certain foods. And there are, I would say, like the people that I count as colleagues, there's a large number of people who have come on this journey with us and who are like all in on moving beyond restrictive diets, who are really looking at the problems of food apartheid and like want to like solve these big structural problems that we have. Lovely to still have so many colleagues from the olden days, but I also have, like, really plugged into, like, a new group of mutuals on social media, sharing each other's content. Weirdly, like, fitness bros and I get along really well now, so that's cool, but also, like, anti-diet dietitians is, like, a big part of my, like, current group of, like, professional colleagues online, and I think it's challenging because all of our messaging is, "Oh, no, it's okay, calm down, we don't need to be afraid." Like, it's totally fine if you don't buy organic, they actually don't there's no difference in health outcomes between organic and conventional food. It matters more what kind of foods you're eating, and you don't have to be perfect, right? Like, that message of calm and reassurance doesn't feed the social media algorithms the way fear does. And I think one of the big challenges we have is figuring out how to get our message out there without engaging in fear mongering. And there's certainly some people within the more science based anti diet part of the wellness community that do use anger and fear to try to get their messages out. I don't see it as being particularly successful. I don't really have a solution for that. I don't have a solution other than like just more of us talking. It will, help.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's a great point because I can think of influencers who the anti-diet person does a rebuttal, and
mhm,
it's like fear that this person is telling you this. And that is what spikes the engagement with people, right? Because
yeah,
then it's like they have an actual response to frustration of the other person
right.
versus like just the normalcy of intuitive eating and calm yourself. Do not engage people the same kind of way. And it is because the more restrictive something is, the more attracted to people are to it for some sort of reason. It's like,
Simplicity.
right, our brain is
Yeah,
like, that I understand. That makes sense. There must be a reason for these things. Give me the list. I'm just going to do the thing that the person tells me to do. And unfortunately, as you've noted, like the science is just tearing those things apart. And
yes.
it was like, I had Jessica Flanagan on the show, one of the first early. I don't know, first 50 shows. I'll put a link in the show notes for people. But, and I remember she was talking about the work that she was doing as a prior AIP coach, and she was starting to see people's health results and fecal samples. And she realized that people's health was actually deteriorating. And she was
Mhm.
like, oh my goodness. And had to like completely do a 180, that she was all on board as well. She was like gung ho, and then had to recognize in a similar way that we did, but different, because she was seeing a result that was showing something different. And it's a harder sell to people of like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna need to just like go back to being normal. Like,
Well,
feel good when I was normal.
it's worthwhile. I feel like there's we've got other challenges to talk about how to make healthy eating inclusive, but it's worthwhile AIP tangent right here to say that Mickey Trescott and Jamie Hartman, who have taken the lead on the AIP since I have moved on to building Nutrivore, have actually just launched like a whole new revised AIP that has almost no initial eliminations. So even the AIP is continuing to follow this science and look at the importance of things like dietary diversity and really like super emphasizing the importance of reintroductions, the importance of not developing that food fear. So even the AIP is evolving over this period of time, not led by me, but led by Mickey and Jamie and the community of AIP coaches. So shout out to the amazing work that they're doing because I can only do so much. And in fact, I'm probably already doing 7 times more than I realistically can accomplish. But but I think that the more we rely on science to inform us, right? And teach people scientific literacy with every piece of content that we create, right? Because the challenge here is that less than a third of Americans are considered scientifically literate. So we need to also like help people understand science is a process. We iterate our understanding. Nutritional sciences is very young. There are still things that we're learning that might change. And when you can help people understand how science works at the same time as you're using the science to like underlie an important principle, then that helps people just understand it better so that when they see the misinformation, they can identify it. But then also it helps people be receptive to the next piece of information, right? The next study that's really important. I think it would be great if we could have better science journalism in the world. I'm super annoyed with them right
But
now.
you'd have to then solve the clickbait problem, right? It's the same thing as the social
Right.
media
It is
algorithm.
again, it's that same how do you get people to engage with content without the outrage piece?
Yeah.
I think so. My don't tell TikTok, but my favorite place on the internet is Threads. Don't tell TikTok. I still love you, but Threads is the most lovely social media platform. You still need to curate your feed the way you do any social media platform, but I have an audience on Threads that is super engaged with positive, non-judgmental information about foods. Hey, here's this really cool thing in watermelon. That's it. That's the whole post. Here's this great thing. Watermelon's good for you. No, the number of people who still think that watermelon is just sugar water is so sad. It's so nutrient dense. Watermelon's so good for you. Second best source of lycopene after tomatoes, and top source of L-citrulline, which is really good for your muscles. So watermelon, great food. And so that's my content on Threads. It's just like, it's 500 characters. So it can't be my normal lengthy prose. But here's like one really cool fact that makes you feel good about a food that you already like, that you already eat regularly. Like that's the vibe. That's the vibe on Threads. Like, here's this really important information to make you feel good about something that you should feel good about that you didn't know that you could feel good about. And the positivity, the way people are engaging with content on Threads, and we're starting to see it spread. We're starting to see that same type of, wow, that's so cool. I didn't know that. A curiosity and an open mind, but also just being positive about foods that have some kind of cool nutrient or neat science showing health benefits, and not talking about just not talking negatively about any food, not even talking negatively about white sugar, right? Like not talking negatively about anything. Food has merit. All foods have merit, right? It either has nutritional merit or it has energy merit, right? So even white sugar, you'd say there's contexts where people need calories. Very important to prevent weight loss during chemotherapy, for example. When you're feeling terrible, and maybe white sugar is a really important food for that person, right? So we're not going to demonize a food because it has a lot of energy. There's contexts where that's very valuable. So foods can have nutrients, it can have energy, and it can have experience, right? It can be um, some delightful thing. And a lot of foods have a mix, right? A lot of foods have two or all three of those. But we can value foods for what it gives us, whether it's energy, nutrients, and or joy. And to be able to take that approach, Threads is the place where people are like, oh, yeah, I get it. This is what I want. And I think because I see this one lovely corner of the internet where people are, pardon the pun, hungry for this type of information, it gives me hope that there is a way to continue to create positive content without the clickbait, without the fear, without the outrage that helps to inform people not just about healthy eating patterns and nutritious foods, but also about a healthy relationship with food, a healthy relationship with our own bodies, and incorporates that into everything. There is this corner of the internet where that works, where people want that and they're engaging with that. And that makes me think we can get that everywhere else. And maybe it's patience. Maybe it's getting more voices over here and
Well,
to this
I'll tell
side.
you where it's not, which is on X, right? Because it's all
Yeah.
the rational, logical people that left X that went on to X.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about where safe spaces might be and how to curate them. And I think that's important, whether it's on a social media platform or it can also be the people in your life. I know
Hmm.
um, that I certainly have people in my life who seem to have a really hard time not talking about their body or other people's bodies
Yeah.
every time I'm in their presence. And whether that looks like advocating for yourself or your children or whatever, I think that it's important that we put ourselves in a position to learn in whatever way works for us, whether you listen to this podcast or you're watching Sarah's daily walks on Instagram, TikTok, or Threads, whatever your preference is, right? Like learning in some sort of way so that when you are in those situations, you can build this tolerance to the behavior that you want to avoid,
Hmm.
right? Like the mindset of, I call it like a trench that's got dug over the same thought process over and over again becomes the Grand Canyon and it's hard to get out of, but you have to, grab on the hands of the people who are trying to lift you out of the Grand Canyon in order to dig a different trench on the other side and to have different thought process. And that can be really hard. And so I do think that community, which means a whole lot of things to a lot of different people, is certainly one of the ways that we have to engage in order to move forward. And part of that has also been really humbling for me to like watch and be part of community that criticizes things that I'm a part of or things that I did before or whatever it might be and be like, yep, I was part of that and I'm
Hmm.
trying to learn and I'm trying to do better. And so one of the areas that I would be remiss if we didn't while we were catching up about is we both have teenagers. We started this
Yes.
journey when our children were
Teeny tiny.
little teenies, little teeny babies. I remember I did a nursing video with Wesley, like teaching people how to breastfeed and
Yeah.
making
I
lactation
think
cookies.
Wesley and Mira were two, maybe, when we
They're
started.
little
Yeah.
babies. Yeah. Yeah. And I know both of us have had journeys that we don't necessarily share in public because that is
Hmm.
our children and that is their right as individuals and to keep separate. But I think one of the things that definitely comes up for me is the idea of how easily I was sucked into orthorexia and
Yeah.
eating disorders and disordered eating as a result of this diet culture. And really thinking, genuinely thinking that I was focusing on my health. I don't know how many times you and I would say things like, this is not what it was because it's sustainable, it's lifestyle. And like it
Mhm.
wasn't for me. It was very much rooted in orthorexia. It was very much rooted in a fear of food, in fat phobia, like not wanting to be fat. And I definitely went from, I've talked on the show before, being bulimic as a teenager to really what was atypical anorexia. I remember there were many days where I missed many meals in order to see a certain number on a scale. And I knew that my body wasn't adjusting things. And I continued to eat that eating pattern because it was supporting an aesthetic that I wanted or a number on a scale that I wanted. And it's hard now being a person who is in a larger body and trying to tell my kids to have confidence in their own skin because I recognize part of them is like, well, I don't want to end up like you. But also knowing that, like, that's part of the judgment of the world, right? Like, there
Yeah.
is, as we've talked about, this amount that goes into health that we do not have control over, that myself, my parents, my grandparents, all being overweight means that my children are not predisposed to be small petite people. That is not that's not their genetic lottery. So there's part of me is like, what can we as parents do as a learned lesson from the experience that we had with falling into these diet traps, whatever they might be, to help support our children? How are you doing that with your girls?
Yeah, I think it there's so many different moving parts to that because we do all have gluten sensitivity and Mira does have dairy sensitivity as well. So there is still this piece of like a food we need to avoid, but I'm really trying to first of all, I'm cooking so many different types of foods now and I'm really trying to expand our palates, expand the diversity of foods that we're eating and reintroduce my kids to foods that if I had been on a different journey, they would have been eating this whole time. And I think modeling is always so important, right? Modeling a more, God, I don't want to say healthy relationship with food because that is not really it. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Like, it's
I don't even
ironic
want
to
to
use the word
say,
healthy when you're trying to say, like, get
right.
away from that connection to food. Yeah.
But it's also weird to say relationship because I don't want to have a relationship with food. Like, that's not what we're doing here. Food, you're an inanimate object. Like, there is nothing, I might as well have a relationship with a rock in my backyard. I
I'm sure
think
you do have some rocks in your
actually,
yard that
yeah, that was a really bad example because I do have favorite rocks. So, okay, fine. No, I think one of the big rules that we have changed, I think this is a really good example is there's no more criteria for dessert. You are allowed to not finish your dinner to save room for dessert in our house now. And for a long, long, long time, you had to finish your plate in order to earn dessert. Dessert does not get earned in this house anymore. Dessert is just a thing that sometimes we have, and it's wonderful when we do. Actually, frequently we have, and it's wonderful when we do. And and if my kids want to eat their dessert first, they're really not hungry, they only have room for dessert, okay, that's fine. If that's happening frequently, we'll have a look at what the eating patterns are that are contributing to that and making sure that overall diet quality is high. But I think that's the best example of how my approach has changed. I try to have no food be a bad food or a special food that you have to earn. We don't earn food. And we still eat seafood several times a week. We still eat tons of fruits and vegetables. We're eating a lot more legumes now. We eat more whole grains now. But we still eat a very whole foods focused diet. But there's no like, ooh, no, candy's a special treat. So we'll only have candy once in a while. Like, you know what? Candy can be in the house all the time. And so I've really tried to help my kids learn they don't feel good if they eat an entire bag of Reese's peanut butter cups. That doesn't feel good. Adults been learning that one. repeatedly lately.
I mean,
Who
Wesley
knows?
has not learned that yet either.
Yeah,
I
there's
think
something
it's part
about
of
being a 17.
I just wanna call out that for me, at least as a parent, is part of that pendulum swing in the opposite direction of, like,
Mhm.
okay, let's talk about the fact that you felt the need you had to hide this instead of
Yes.
let's talk about what happened, right? Like, to me, that's where my parenting goes is like,
Yep.
I'm sorry that you felt the need that you couldn't express your needs versus the candy is the problem because it's not.
Mhm.
It's the relationship that I set up
Yep.
about food.
It's very much an intuitive eating approach to if that's the food you want, like, have as much of it as you want. Eventually, that food loses that allure, and I'm letting myself go through that. I'm letting my kids go through that, and I still I'm still cooking, 99.99999% of our meals at home. We still eat very high quality diets, but I think we just have I'm really trying to get away from any sort of sense of I can't eat that food, right? Because when we don't allow ourselves foods, there's research, the psychology research shows this, right? We fixate on it, we crave it, and though we obsess over it, and those obsessions they magnify. And as somebody who yeah, absolutely had orthorexia and still binge eating disorder. I really still had binge eating disorder that whole time. I know I said I never binge anymore, but I totally did. I just didn't binge on pizza. I was still binging, but on, right, like allowed foods, but I still had that overeating compulsion behavior. And it's really only been like a lot of therapy lately that's really helped me get to the other side. I don't even want to necessarily claim that I'm other side. Slightly uh, in the middle of the parabola, let's
You're
say.
learning. You're learning.
We're getting there. I have more strategies now than I had before, I think is really what it is. And so a huge part of our journey is really like trying to not have any food be able to yell my name from across the room, right? Like, not give any food that power. And doing that means that if I go, man, Reese's peanut butter cup, I don't know why this is my go to example right now, sounds really good right now. I'm going to go have one. Actually, I really want two. Actually, I really want three. That's part of the journey for me. And I think I've been on that part of this journey for a couple of years now. Like, this is I'm in a place where I have a much better sense of when I'm full. I have a much like I haven't binged in a very long time. And I think that only came out of knowing that I needed to get over this idea of needing to earn a food or a food being bad, so I shouldn't eat it, and really knowing that I needed to challenge that in my own brain and realizing that I needed therapy to really like help me work through a lot of that because so much of it is like from my early childhood. And that's been this like side project through this whole time. And you can see the influence of all that psychology in how I communicate Nutrivore, in the stories that I tell in the book, in how I'm building the website. You can see like the work of recovering from, or at least working to recover from eating disorder and working to change what I accidentally taught my kids that I didn't realize I was teaching them while I still have some influence. We're so close, right? Like Adele is a junior, so right, we're doing a college tour. I'm not traveling for these colleges. Like we did a college tour, but like she's talking about colleges and she's going to be out of the house in a year and a half. And so I hope that these are the lessons and the shift back to some kind of middle ground and being able to be open to that. I hope actually that lesson, because I feel like that's translatable to so many parts in life, being open to new information, being open to change our behaviors because of that new information. I'm hoping that's what sticks with them and not, I need to hide my Reese's peanut butter cups and then eat the whole bag after everyone's in bed. I hope that's I don't think that's what will stick. I think what will stick is it's okay. to have Reese's peanut butter cups in the house, and it's okay to sometimes eat more than I intended to and not feel that great, and that's fine. That doesn't impact how I choose foods for long-term health. It's just another thing I'm getting from food is joy and maybe a slightly upset stomach, but first there's a whole lot of joy.
Yeah, sometimes you make a choice to experience the joy knowing that you're gonna have an
Yep.
upset stomach. I have really enjoyed reintroducing curries in my life, and, like,
Mm,
that has been a whole experience to enjoy the tingle of spice for the first time in a long time and to not have that fear that you talked about, and I think that's really important as people are on this journey is to own and recognize that there is a lot of psychology at play. There's a lot of fear and stress and so many things that go into what a lot of us have put on our diet, on the foods that we're eating for so long. And I feel like that was a kind of easy place for me to put my feelings for a really long time instead
yeah,
of living in and feeling those feelings. So I love that we're helping our children along that journey. I feel exactly as you do, like, oh, what did I do? And I'm also really grateful that I caught myself midway through with the recognition of this isn't the lesson that I want to teach my kids. I was wrong. I'm sorry. And I owned that with all the kids. Like, I was wrong and I'm sorry. And now we're going to try to course correct. And I recognize
yeah.
this is going to be difficult for everybody. So that said, how are your girls? I want to leave on something more positive. Tell us about your family, your garden, your favorite rocks. Tell us about your.
Okay. So I think being a teenage girl is really challenging, and my kids are navigating it extremely well, but not without road bumps. So they're both really okay. They're really clearly growing into the people that they will become. I sometimes use that passive aggressively when they're being sassy. I say, "Oh, it's so wonderful to watch you grow into the person that you're becoming." But earnestly, it really is. It really is seeing their the causes that they care about, their minds. Mira just told me that she thinks she maybe wants to be an economist. Where did that come from? So Adele's doing crazy well. Adele has discovered that she loves organic chemistry and that's what she wants to do. So also, where did that come from? She's doing super well. She's in a magnet high school, a STEM magnet program. She's doing super well. Mira, when she goes to high school next year, is she just got accepted into an international baccalaureate program. So they're doing super well. Adele's got a girlfriend. They've been dating for 9 months. It's adorable. I love it, and I love her girlfriend, so it's lovely. Mira's not allowed to date until high school, but her best friend and Mira, they're planning on dating. I don't know if that will actually happen, but they've been planning this for, like, 2 years.
They're already a couple, but they're just telling you they're just friends right
Right. I mean, they do flirt together, which
now.
is really uncomfortable for me. Um, but, um but yeah, both of my children are very secure in their identities and thriving at school and certainly being forced to develop some resilience skills and some strategies for navigating mental health challenges. And it is the common experience now for especially teenage females. And yeah, they're Dell's still working on her book. Mira just wrote one that I'm currently editing. So they're both avid and very talented writers. Mira still plays piano, and so I get to wake up to the sounds of Chopin in the mornings, which is delightful. So yeah, they're doing really well. Being a teenage girl is it's tough. It's tough. So they're also facing a lot of challenges. I think being an adolescent in general, it's a time of a lot of emotions and a not fully integrated cerebrum. So it's there's a lot going
Also,
on
I
for
think
them.
I love hearing you talk, and for those who are listening, I hope you heard it in Sarah's voice. Just light up when you're talking about your girls. And I I think also for me as the parent of a teenager, I have a lot of compassion for the fact that we did not grow up in the age of smartphones and social media.
Mhm.
And we also did not have a global pandemic during our formative
Yes.
years. And I hope that for listeners, if you don't have a teenager right now, or even like a preteen type kid, have compassion for those that are around you when you see them cranky in public, or your sister's kid just isn't behaving the way that you think that they ought to. Like, just recognize that there is so much more complexity to what is happening with that age group than was happening to us at that
Yeah.
time. And I know, because you spoke of it, like, being a teenager is hard. The way that our brain chemistry and our hormones and learning how to be independent, but still feeling very much like a child, but in an adult body. Like, there's so much that happens that is complex to add social media and global pandemic on top. Just feel so deeply for these kids for how that will affect their overall life and
Yeah.
all that stuff. So I'm thrilled to hear that everyone is doing well. Is your garden thriving? Did you give up
It
on it?
is. No, so I've been actually every year adding another garden bed, and my plan is to keep doing that until it's too much to maintain. So last summer, we probably got half of our fruits and vegetables from the garden, like all summer. And I'm still like, I thought zucchini, I'm going to make zucchini fritters for dinner tonight. I thought zucchini from the freezer that was from my garden over the summer. So I still have stuff in the freezer that I'm like, oh, we need to get through this before all of these things grow again.
Before we get
Uh,
more? Yeah,
yeah.
awesome.
So yeah, and this winter, like even right now, I've had a salad bed go through all winter. I think we really lucked out. We had a pretty mild winter other than five days there in the middle, in which case I worked so hard to keep my salad bed going and I succeeded. So it was great. But yeah, we've been getting still like 3 or 4 like dinner salads for the 4 of us a week from my vegetable garden. So it's going strong and I think if anything, my enjoyment of it just has kept increasing. So, like, every afternoon, usually around this time, I go out into the backyard for 10 minutes, and sometimes I just sit there with a cup of tea or something and enjoy the sun. Sometimes I pull a couple of weeds, sometimes I throw a couple of seeds somewhere. So sometimes I'm doing a job and sometimes I'm just enjoying it or seeing what's ready to pick. And that part of my routine is just my little afternoon break that resets me and, like, sometimes gets me through the rest of the day. And then once a month-ish, there's, like, a half day on the weekend that is entirely spent turning over a bed or turning over compost or, like, doing some kind of big job. But honestly, I feel like my favorite hobby of all the hobbies is digging holes. I don't think I am happier. Okay, doing the cha-cha slide with a bunch of little kids, about equal status to digging holes in terms of, like, the things that make me happy all the way down. Every single layer, those are the 2 things that just that's my happy place, and so, yeah, any excuse to dig a hole in the dirt, that's lovely, and
Little library fell over
oh,
because
no.
we didn't cement it. Matt thought it would be fine, and it wasn't. And so we need a hole digger. Sarah, you need to come set.
Uh-huh. Okay, okay,
Now you have motivation.
now I do.
I also got a composter for Christmas, and we put food scraps in it and it turns it into soil. And Matt's addicted. He's obsessed. And
I have one.
he puts the composted soil on our house plants. And then do you know what happens? The dogs eat the soil of the house.
Yep.
So
Mhm.
I'm new rule. The composted soil must go outside. I am so
Uh
tired of pulling the dogs off of the soil of the houseplants.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter whether it's, like, the kitchen compost made in my little cool kitchen composter, or if I buy compost, or if it's the compost from the compost bins. All composts are equally as delicious, apparently, to dogs. I do not have a solution for that one.
At least I know it's quality whatever, because their noses are telling them it is worthy of eating. So, well, Sarah, it has been wonderful to see and connect with you again. I know our OG listeners are just feeling that breath of fresh air. Thank you so much for coming. And as a reminder, listeners, you can catch up with Sarah on Nutrivore.com and on social, all the places at Dr. Sarah Ballantyne. And your Nutrivore book is coming out in May.
Yeah,
Is
May
that,
14th.
do you want to share with listeners before you go?
New book comes out May 14th. It's available now for pre-order. It is the best book I've ever written by a bajillion miles. It makes me a little bit embarrassed to admit that I've written previous books because this book is so good. It is interweaving the science with the psychology, with historical anecdotes and like really interesting, like, guess what they did in this study? This is so cool. Like, so it's much more like storytelling. It's all wrapped up in a narrative. And it is, I just read the audio book. We did the recording of that last week. So like I just got to read my whole book out loud like 5 times because that's how audiobook recordings work. But it's so good. It's such a good book. I'm just saying, you will love this book no matter where you are in your journey of health, wellness, anti-diet, diet, anywhere in that spectrum. This book really straddles that world between diet and anti-diet and reflects all of the stuff that we've been talking about for the last hour. And pre-order campaign is live. If you go to nutrivore.com/book, I'm offering $100 of digital resources as a bonus for your pre-order. And my team and I have been planning these resources for longer than I started working on the book. So like over 2 years. And I'm so proud of it because it's a collection of 14 ebooks that complement the book. So there's not very little like overlap, like things that you get in both places. And it just creates this much like wider, like the breadth of like resource is just so exciting. And so yeah, so like also I'll bribe you for your pre-order. So you make sure you check that out. And you can pre-order the book in any format. If you want to listen to me reading my own book for the audiobook, which I highly encourage because I know I did a good job of it. Yeah, you can pre-order the audio version, the ebook version for whatever the places like Kindle, or pre-order from your local independent bookstores and go claim those pre-order bonuses because they're amazing and you should have them.
Thank you so much for coming back. And listeners, as always, we appreciate your willingness to be open to growth through your own personal changes. As you can see, hopefully, Sarah and I are leading the path, walking the walk for you. We recognize no one is perfect, but in listening, learning, and unlearning, we can choose to become better versions of ourselves for ourselves. We will be back on Friday with a regular episode for you. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in.